Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the live cast from Avero. Today, we're going to talk about the total cost of ownership for ERP systems or any software. Um, there's a common misconception, perception that you only pay once for the software or a one fee, and in larger implementations, larger projects that are for major organizations, thousands of employees, multiple organizations within the organization, departments, elected offices, fee offices, what have you. Government can be complicated, especially when it comes to larger counties, states for sure, even some larger cities. So, how do you calculate what buying an ERP system is going to cost you in the short and long term. Um, and this is a fairly in depth topic, and it may require more than one session. So feel free to drop your questions in the chat box or LinkedIn or wherever you're watching this, and tell me where you're watching from or joining us from. My name is AV. I'm the founder and CEO at Avero Advisors, a third-party independent consulting firm that helps local governments and organizations across the U.S. Um, digitally transform their operations. And a big part of our practice is helping clients buy, implement, and make sure that these software systems work for you, and not the other way around. So we go live every Wednesday, um, and then this live cast will turn into blog posts and podcasts and several other ways for you to engage with our content and stay in touch. So without further ado, and please keep the questions coming, so that this isn't boring. It's very exciting stuff for me. Um, I am an accountant by training. Somehow ended up doing ERP and digital transformation consulting for governments over the last 20 years. But near and dear to my heart, have done a lot of total cost of ownership assessments and analyses for clients, big and small. And I'm going to show some samples today, examples of um, how we go about analyzing these costs. Because think about it, when you put an RFP out, you have a good idea, especially if you worked with us through the RFP process, you have a good idea of what should be included in that RFP, what the requirements are, what modules you want, what integrations you want, how you want this thing that's a puzzle to fit together. And when proposals come in, it's may not always be um, what you expected, right? It may cost more than you thought it was going to cost. Vendors produce um, products that are not quite there because your requirements say certain things, and they're like, well, we're working on it, but this won't be ready until 2 years from now. But sign a contract with us anyway because it's a small module. We have all of the other things. So how do you think about all of these things as you're going through a selection process? We've talked at length, in depth, about how do you do selections, right? How do you do the qualitative analysis? How do you score vendors? How do you score proposals? How do you do reference checks? But you've done all of those wonderful things, and now you're at the cost stage. You're trying to negotiate a good contract. But to choose between vendor A and vendor B, you need to know what the total cost of ownership is. What is this thing going to cost me? Not just during implementation, not just when they turn the systems live, not just during training, but what does it cost you on an ongoing basis, especially in a SaaS environment, which it's been a boon for the user community, right? And also for the software vendors. They get to keep charging you forever if they do a good job. Um, but if it's a SaaS environment, this is a subscription fee that you're going to pay at least for the lifetime of your use of this product. So, what is that total cost of ownership? So it gets easier post go live, right? Because it's just the one software licensing fee or subscription fee you're paying, in the most simplest of senses. But in the more complicated projects, it can lead to ongoing costs that were unanticipated. So we have to, um, at the negotiating stage or before you sign the contract, you have to make sure that what you're signing up for is palatable to you, to your organization, that you don't just have short-term funds to pay for this project to kick it off and take it to go live, because these invoices will keep coming, rightfully so, because you know what you're doing today may be really antiquated. You're not using the right processes, you don't have the right systems, and the cost of not doing something may be greater than biting the bullet and going through this ERP implementation process. So, multiple ways of skinning this cat, but since we're only talking financials today, we'll start with the definition of total cost of ownership. And to me, it is, what does it take to buy, implement, and use this system in the long term? And what does it encompass, right? Is it just the software? Is it the hardware that goes with it? Is it the consulting services? Is it the PMO setup? Is it the training, change management? It's all of the above. And if you're going through this process with debt funding as a government agency, if you release some bonds, issued bonds just to specifically go through an ERP implementation, you have to factor the cost of those um, funds into the total cost of ownership. So there's a little document that I've worked up. I'm gonna attempt to show it. Let me make sure I have the right screen set up for this. Okay. Um, yeah. Oh, I actually don't. Give me a second. Well, I'm gonna take audience questions as I figure out my technical difficulties. Okay, Mackenzie asks, how do government agencies typically approach evaluation of ARP total ownership costs, and what might they consider changing? How do they typically approach it? Well, the fallacy is what's in the proposal is the number, right? To us, that's the first offer, and you have to really make sure that the vendor has done the due diligence to understand your proposal, your RFP, your requirements, and then crafted their proposal specifically to that RFP, because it's very easy to slap a per year cost on a proposal. Um, it's very easy for vendors, and we fall into this trap sometimes ourselves, right? Look at the size, look at what kind of agency it is, and say they might be, x dollars per year kind of a client. But looking at what is being offered at what cost is really important. Having consultants helps, because we can then tell you, uh, what other agencies of your size and composition are being offered, and try to match apples to apples as far as possible. What might they consider changing? Everything that I'm going to talk about today, right? What is the total cost of ownership? Don't just look at what the vendor's proposing, because when you dig deeper, you'll quickly realize that there are deficiencies in what the vendor's offering. Not their fault. You didn't ask for it, right? For example, a lot of our clients in the public housing space, um, everyone's moving. A lot of people are moving from an incumbent system to a newer system, and the new system vendor that is kind of taken over the market is really good at sticking a similar number in front of everybody, no matter what the size, right? What that number doesn't tell you is what other services you're going to need to successfully implement the solution. Services like third party implementation consultants, configuration experts in that system that will spend 6 months or more configuring at a very minute detail your system, your new system. So those things come into the picture, and if they come into the picture at go live, you're in trouble because you haven't planned for this cost. So really taking a hard look and asking the right questions to the vendor is very important, on who's doing what, and things like a RACI matrix, and what kind of PMO are we setting up, and who's responsible for what, is extremely important at this stage. All right, I'm gonna attempt to share my screen one more time, and I think I'm gonna get it this time. The other thing that's being asked in the chat box is, um, what what strategies can be my sharing isn't working, I'm sorry. What strategies can be employed to minimize hidden costs in government ERP project? Again, um, just really thinking through what you're doing. Hidden costs, let's talk about that. uh, if you've done a good job of asking for specific modules, specific services, specific integrations, and reporting in your RFP, there should be no hidden cost. And nobody's trying to take advantage of you when you put an RFP out, right? Everyone is acting in good faith. It's on the client, it's on the people that are releasing RFPs to make sure that they've covered their bases. So if you didn't ask for something, again, like building a house, if you haven't asked for a certain size of a door, you're not going to get it. So hidden costs is a misnomer. It's costs for things you haven't asked for. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't unscrupulous vendors that don't hide costs from you. That it happens, right? But that's where really keen eye on looking at contracts and proposals comes in handy. Someone that's done it before. Um, yes, you can identify costs and look at financial reports and proposals, but you need to have somebody that's an expert in these things, looking at how to um, evaluate costs of total ownership. All right, one more time. Okay, I'm just gonna go for it. Um, so, what is the total cost of ownership for an ERP system? Total cost of ownership, the definition is a financial estimate that helps you measure the direct and indirect cost of owning and operating an ERP system over its entire life cycle. So, again, starting from the beginning, what is it costing you to put this RFP out? If you have consultants, someone helping you, if you have a full time dedicated employee doing nothing but this, that's the cost you're incurring. So start from that point and work forward into implementation cost, the cost of acquisition, the cost of implementation, the cost of running the system in the long term. It includes both initial and ongoing costs and common costs, right? The things that you think about when you first talk about implementing an ERP system is software. What is the software going to cost you? Um, that's the easy one, right? Because that's the thing you're buying. The second thing is hardware, the cost of purchasing or leasing the server. So this is different now, right? This was very true 5 to 10 years ago, where most vendors were only offering you on-premise solutions, and the um, software as a service was not quite a thing yet. So now that it is, and the more RFPs we look at, the more clients we help, it's very apparent that quickly the on-premise solution is not being offered, if at all, right? So most RFPs are being put out for software as a service. The second thing is that doesn't mean that you don't need hardware upgrades, right? The cost of buying a SaaS solution or subscribing to it also comes with making sure that you have the right bandwidth, the infrastructure, the cybersecurity, and the people in place that can run these infrastructure elements for you. Because it's a fallacy to think that we can take this to the cloud and everything's magically going to work. You still have to access the system using your cities or counties infrastructure. And we've run into these situations quite a bit, right? If you haven't planned for it, you're going to be in trouble again, because the vendor's not going to tell you, they're going to tell you minimum requirements. Your IT folks are going to tell you, yes, we meet them. And at go live, you quickly find out, or at testing, that that's not true, because a particular piece of hardware or a stack of network equipment does not work with the vendor security setup, whatever. So hardware upgrades are very important. They're not directly related to the system anymore. You don't need servers, because you're buying servers, you're buying space, you're buying compute power from the SaaS vendor. That's what the fee is for. But you still need hardware to make sure that your um, infrastructure in house is up to snuff. Because if it's not, then this new and shiny SaaS solution that you're about to pay millions for does not work. It's not going to work. Implementation cost. What does that mean? So there's a few components to this. So one is something called, you have system integrators. If you go by Oracle or a Workday or any of these large uh, products that they have the option of implementing the product themselves, but they also have a very robust system implementer network that is responsible for delivering the product to you. So you'll have a SaaS contract and you'll have an implementation contract with a third party. So this is the cost of installing, configuring, testing, and deploying the system. So you'll have, let's say you buy Oracle, you'll have a third party implementer that will come in and actually do the implementation for you. You'll still have a line of contact with Oracle, but you'll have another third party that's doing the configuration, that's doing the testing, the training, project management. And then you might have another party that's doing um, third party consulting, running the PMO, someone like a Vero that comes in to make sure that multiple vendors are being managed according to the client's requirements and that we're not missing anything during the implementation. So that cost needs to be factored into your TCO. And then training. Very important because obviously if you don't have the right training you're not going to be able to use the system, and training can go multiple ways. You can have ongoing training as you're doing the configuration, you're getting trained on the system. You can have pre-go live training, you can have self-guided training. Lots of great tools out there today, and many of the major vendors provide those bundled in with their services, so that you don't have to buy them separately. Sometimes you do, but training is critical, so you have to include the cost of training in there. And then maintenance, of course, this is an older term. You're paying SaaS fees. Maintenance is taken care of, um, in theory, with those SaaS fees. But if you had to buy new equipment, new IT infrastructure for you to be able to use this system, then yes, you have to factor those costs in, or fractions of, because infrastructure is not necessarily dedicated to that one system you're buying. Um, and then ongoing costs, right? There's again many ways to skin this cat. You can classify this as capital expenditure to the point where you go live, and then it turns into operational expenses. It really depends on how you have your um, budgets and finances set up. So what's next? What affects the total cost of ownership? Right, the things that go into it are one thing, but this isn't. It's not necessarily apples to apples every time. The cost of ownership can significantly vary depending on several factors: um, size and complexity. How big is your organization? What is the what is it comprised of? Like, are you a county? Are you a city? Are you a state agency? Are you a nonprofit? What is the makeup of your organization? And of course, that will dictate the requirements, and that will dictate what kind of system you get and how you negotiate and what kind of implementation you go through. So that particular point needs to be accounted for at a very early stage. Level of customization required. This is a tricky one, right? Customization um, is a dirty word in implementations anymore. You don't customize solutions. If you configure them, and a lot of the newer solutions out there that are more modern are very malleable without having to customize it. The advent of no code cloud services, SaaS contract, they've kind of given a lot of flexibility to um, vendors and users alike to make sure that you're not going down this customization path, because that can lead to trouble. And again, we've talked about this a lot. Customizations that are only specific to your organization also mean that now you're stuck with this Frankenstein system that maybe one person in your organization knows how to maintain and keep up, and now you're hostage to that customization, that resource, and that vendor. So try to avoid customizations. There's a place for it, but it's not in a modern operating, regularly operating county government environment. Choice of deployment model. Again, the choices are limited anymore. You're not gonna get a vendor that will offer you um, an on-premise solution. You might, but that comes with its own costs. If you choose on premise, you're talking about increasing your hardware costs, your people costs, ongoing maintenance, and really not taking advantage of all of the good things that come with um, taking on a SaaS contract and taking your systems to the cloud. Lots of great benefits we've covered before. Go to our website and any of our channels that have anything to do with on-premise or cloud, and you'll see a lot of good resources there. So I'm going to take a break on sharing the screen, but I'm going to take some questions from our lovely audience. Let's see. Megan asks, what role does vendor selection play in managing and reducing the total cost of ownership of ERP solutions in the public sector? What role does vendor selection play? A pretty large one. I think if you do vendor selection well, and don't just buy the first thing that comes your way, you've done well. You need to take advantage of competition. Do an RFP process, even if you don't need to, right? It doesn't have to be formal, but make vendors compete against each other so that you get the best deal. You can see apples to apples, who's offering what, and take advantage of that to really do your selection well. And who knows, you might choose the vendor that you wanted in the first place, but that extra time and effort spent will be really useful because you'll learn a lot about your own operations, about your needs, and you will get a more decent price point. Of course, pre-competed contracts have that have been bid by the state and whatnot that you're using as a cooperative also have decent pricing. So um, how do you do vendor selection well, and what does it do to total cost of ownership? That right there, if you can get a better deal for yourself up front, then TCO goes down. um, can you provide examples of successful total cost of ownership management in government ERP implementations? Um, yeah, I mean, several examples. We've helped so many clients through the RFP process. We've helped so many clients through the needs assessment, the selection process. That every time we uh, are handling a negotiation for a client, it's always from a TCO perspective. It's always from what is this going to cost you in the long run. The second thing we make sure to take care of is the balance of payments. Um, we've seen many contracts where the vendors are like, yeah, pay us 80% of the contract up front, and we'll take you live in 3 months, and life's going to be good. And our experience tells us that's not a good deal. So um, many different examples, and I'll talk about one as we go through this session. I'm not going to throw out names, but I'll share a sample total cost of ownership analysis spreadsheet that we recently did for a client that shows you exactly what's what and what the client's in for. Um, so, what's next on total cost of ownership? Calculating total cost of ownership. I mean, add all these things up, right? That's the simple answer. But you have to really take into account. This is where I nerd out because I am a trained accountant. You have to take into account your direct costs, your indirect cost, uh, and the cost of not doing this project is also important. You can't only look at what is this going to cost me to do and how am I going to get this funding. You're wasting a lot of money right now if you're using a system that is 20 plus years old. It's green screen, there's a lot of paperwork flying around, Excel sheets, extra people just to maintain Excel sheets. This is costing you in the long term more than it would cost you to take this project on. So really think through direct costs, indirect costs. What is it going to cost me to buy this product, keep it operational, and what are the cost savings? You're going to save so much in terms of efficiency, automation, reassignment of staff to more strategic roles instead of just keeping up with spreadsheets and paperwork. Uh, there's a lot of good benefits to taking on this cost. Um, and there's this Joe. Hey, Joe, welcome. The cost of inaction is rarely discussed. Thank you, Joe. Joe's been on the show many times, and we think alike. Yeah, cost of not doing something is several times greater. It may not be in monetary terms, but do you take that into account as you do TCO? Absolutely, you have to take into account not just the financial cost, but also the non-monetary cost, the qualitative cost. Um, so, how do you reduce total cost of ownership? Um, Several different strategies, right? One, choosing the right deployment model. Our professional advice typically these days is don't worry about on-prem. This it may seem like a good idea on paper, but it's a losing strategy because you really can't keep up with the the speed of innovation and the management that SaaS products offer you. And I'm saying that as a third party independent consultant that we don't resell any product. We're not particularly tied to anybody. We're not tied to anybody. But SaaS is the way to go. So choose the right deployment model. Um, Favorable contract terms. We did a whole series on how to negotiate favorable contract terms. And again, this is not just give us a discount, take your discount from 2% to 7%. Yes, do that too. But contract terms are more than just financial terms, right? Payment structure, milestones. Um, how do you get out of a contract? What happens when things are going wrong? Who's responsible? All of those things need to be accounted for. And that reduces your total cost of ownership. And then optimizing system performance and usage. Uh, Again, defining it up front is really, really critical in terms of what you want this to do, right? What is your expected outcome from this system? And making sure that you're driving towards this. And this is critical post go live because it's really easy to say we are live, pat ourselves on the back, and next thing you know, your old spreadsheets are coming back. So, really making sure that you have your eye on the ball in optimizing system usage in the long term is critical because, again, it's going to give you cost savings that are not necessarily dollar based. You'll be more efficient, you'll have more access to data, you will have more access to timely data, and your people will be engaged in more strategic work. Lots of value that isn't necessarily monetary. Of course, you can make assumptions and come up with ROI percentages and all that good stuff, but really, these are more um, qualitative elements. So next, I want to show you an example of how we do it. Again, this is a sample, doesn't apply to any specific client, and but this is our methodology for identifying and trying to come up with a total cost of ownership for a client. And in this example, you'll see that this is particularly limited to the implementation phase, but you'll get a good idea of how we tend to do that. All right. Screen share. Let's see. Okay. I'm getting the hang of this. Okay. So in this example, this particular client had, they put out a really big RFP, huge county, and they wanted to replace all of their current systems. Older implementation, not doing what um, uh, they wanted the system to do for them for many years, and they were like, let's go look for what's out there, right? And then it was finance, HR, the whole thing, everything to do with a large county organization. Now think of what's involved: large financials, big legislature, council, um, uh, HR operations. They have multiple different unions, so that makes it complicated. Um, and lots of integrations, lots of small custom built products that the incumbent vendor had built for them that they were paying for a long time. So, um, l- you know, long story short, they put an RFP out that was pretty comprehensive. shortlisted a couple of vendors, did demos, and um, the proposal that came in. Now you're trying to pick between two or three vendors. You need to make sure you're comparing apples to apples, right? So uh, you have to look at these at not just modules but also components of the system, of the contract. So financial fees, obviously the first thing is, yeah, your main system, finance, HR. What are the SaaS fees? And these are all made up numbers. So SaaS fees, year one, year two, three, four, five. So this is the life of the contract, right? You're buying a subscription, and the contract for the subscription is 5 years. What is the per year cost? Now, keep in mind, this does not include implementation costs. This is just for the privilege of your organization to use the system. And once again, these are made up numbers, uh, you know, but depending on the systems, they might be in the range. So the subscription fee, what is it going to take for you to access the system, right? That's your subscription fee. Two, professional services. During implementation, do you want training from the vendor itself instead of a third party? They might have learning libraries. Like I mentioned, training is not necessarily in a classroom. It's not necessarily in a block of 1 week. It can happen on an ongoing basis, and that's where training libraries, online training systems, things like WalkMe enabled training programs are really really helpful. So, are you buying that from the vendor, and when is it going to be paid for? In this case, we're saying it's year one. um, Customer service tiers, right? Some vendors will offer you 24/7 service. Some will offer you service that is specific to your time zone. Some will offer service that is only specific to the vendor's time zone. Some will offer you chat features. Some offer nothing but here's our community, we'll make you part of the community and you can ask other users how to solve your problems. All of these things come at a cost. So depending on what customer service tier you are buying, and again, this varies from vendor to vendor, right? Some vendors are like, everything's included in our SaaS fee, which is great. But others will tell you that, to achieve other levels of service, you might have to pay a little more. Um, it's like buying, advanced or prepaid service for your car, prepay oil service for the next 5 years kind of thing. But I'm really oversimplifying it. Anyway, the next thing is implementation cost, right? This is what we talked about earlier. Who's going to configure your system? If it's not the vendor that's selling you the product, um, then it's the third party that is going to come in and take on the responsibility of providing professional services, right? You've bought the subscription. Now, the third party will come in. They're certified. They've been vetted by these vendors. They don't just get to say, we'll come in and implement Workday or Oracle or SAP for you. These are very specialized organizations that are extremely well vetted by the company selling the product. So, implementation consultant will cost you again, depending on what they've been asked to do for you, it'll cost you money and time to work with them to actually get the system integrated and implemented and configured the way you want it to be. I'm going to blow this up a little bit. Realize it might be small. um, and that involves things like the actual going into the system, doing sessions with your team, helping you configure the system based on your process mapping that you've done before the client picked the provider, and consulting services, right? Things like uh, best practices on this particular system. It might involve change management because you're going from a 20-year-old system to something really modern, and again, something we've talked about at length. It can make or break projects like this. You have to pay attention to change management, and this change management from the implementation consultant can be specifically from the system perspective, right? Here's what your system looks like today. This is what the process is going to be in the future. um, and you might have some travel fees, etc. So you've taken your SaaS fee and your implementation consultant fee. Now, this piece here will be short term, right? Unless you enter into long term agreements with the implementation consultant, and there's valid use cases for that, because when they're done with configuring your system, they are probably the people that are most uh, intimately familiar with your configuration. So they might offer you things like annual maintenance. So if you go down here, this is the option you may have to, year one did the implementation. Once we are live, we're gonna charge you 80K a year to keep your system up, be your first point of contact for customer service, and just take responsibility for the configurations that we have built for you. So, but that's an option. You don't have to do that. Again, it really depends on who the vendor's mix is and how you're doing this. Um, then you might have another vendor that's offering, let's say, asset management. Even within that, you will have your SaaS fees, your implementation fees, professional services, integrating with your GIS, integrations, data conversion, uh, and that's another vendor that you have to take account of and include in your TCO. You might have a permitting software. So this is an example of a client, hypothetical, that asked for HR, payroll, asset management, and permits and land management systems. So when the proposals came in, let's say they're choosing three different vendors in a best of breed approach, right? So this is what TCO looks like, or at least the implementation costs look like going forward. And so when you look for total cost of ownership, this example shows you not just implementation, but it's also showing you the cost of the contract, right? And at year 5, if you choose to um, renew the contract, keep the contract going, at that point you'll have some escalation clauses built into the current contract that don't allow for 100% increase in SaaS fees, and things like that need to be included in the contract. But at this point, you'll have the option of staying with the vendor or um, choosing something else, but you might have to go through the whole process again. So uh, accounting for total cost of ownership needs to include what happens through the length of the contract. Same thing with the permitting vendor. You might have different numbers, but all of these end up being your total annual cost plus your implementation cost. So if you notice, year one will be a lot higher, and then you roll into, as you're going live, your implementation costs are going down, but now you're in a steady state of um, paying SaaS fees and hosting fees and maintenance, you know, enhanced management fees that make up the cost of ownership for that contractor. And there you have your total cost of implementing the system, cost of ownership over the life of the contract. And of course, if this is a 10-year contract, it goes beyond that. Now, what else is included in here? Hardware upgrades. Like we talked about, you may need new hardware. You may need new PCs. You may need new switches. You may need new internet providers because you don't have the bandwidth to access the system in the cloud. So that needs to happen before you start implementing. So make sure you're doing a good assessment of your infrastructure along with a good assessment of what you need in a new ERP environment, because hardware upgrades will depend. It's my first it depends for the day. Um, but hardware upgrades depends on where you are today. If you're running AS400 systems, if you're a decentralized IT operation, if you don't have commercial grade fiber optic internet uh, with redundancy, you may not be able to take full advantage of your flashy new ERP system. So that then becomes a project in itself, right? And then we've had projects where we've help clients spend or implement new infrastructure for 3 to 500K, or it might be just one specific um, piece of network equipment that you need to really make this happen. But if you don't have your ducks in a row as far as your IT infrastructure is concerned, then spending $6 million on a brand new ERP solution is may not work out. So it depends, but it's very, very important. So consider that into the TCO of doing this. And then you have PMO change management. So keep in mind that when the vendor presents their product, right? This is the product. This is what they're offering you and some professional services, and you're on your own to configure and use it. That's one model. Then you have your implementation consultant that says, we're going to configure this for you. We're going to put the nuts and bolts together. We'll build this Lego into something that you want to use. And when they say implementation training consulting, they're doing that from a very narrow perspective. This is the product. This is our scope of work. We're configuring this, and we're going to be out of here unless you buy maintenance. You're a city with a county 5 to 10,000 employees, several different departments. Um, seem to have lost. Am I still live? Somebody say something. Ooh, looks like we're back. Sorry about that. Connection issues as I'm talking about hardware and um, infrastructure. Anyway, so the PMO is different from the implementation consultant. Is the whole point? The PMO, what they do is make. sh- Hey Sam, welcome. Yeah, sorry about that. Not sure what's going on, but anyway, PMO is different from the implementation consultant. A PMO is the organization that will make sure that everything is running like clockwork, that people are being communicated to, that you have a pulse on the requirements and what the vendor community is delivering, that change management is happening at all levels, not just at the software level, because this is going to change the way um, your people do business. So a PMO is critical, and the PMO is made up of a program manager, project managers for each work stream. You may have business analysts that are paying real close attention to every work stream and business process and configuration, making sure that the requirements are being adhered to. Because your users will be sitting in configuration sessions, looking at the overall picture. They're looking at how is this going to work? How are we going to configure this? The vendors working on the system as they're configuring. The business analysts, consultants, PMO folks will do nothing but make sure that your interests are being looked after, that they're adhering to standard practices. I mean, we follow PMI um, standards, which are very stringent, and they're really, really critical in a large scale implementation like the one here on the sample. Um, but anyway, with that, I think it's important to identify not just the hardware, software configuration, implementation costs, SaaS fees, but also what is the cost of change for your organization? If this doesn't go well, what is it going to do? So at this level, the cost, I mean, there is no option to fail. You have to succeed. So our um, recommendations always are don't skimp out. If you're going to spend 6 to 10 million on a large ERP implementation, you need the support because your employees have full-time day jobs. The configuration consultants you bring in will have a specific scope to take care of. You need a PMO. You need a third-party independent PMO that does nothing but project manage and make sure that the what you bought, what you raised money for, what you stuck your neck out for, is being delivered at the highest quality and up to your standards. Um, so with that, this is a very, very short, skinny version of calculating total cost of ownership. There's so much more that goes into it. I'd be happy to take questions, uh, either on this session or feel free to reach out to any one of us. Reach out to me for um, if you need to discuss any more around TCO, around selections, about vendor negotiations and best practices and things like that. The other thing I want to sign off with today is we're hiring. Vero is looking for sharp people that are interested in this line of work. Uh, that are really passionate about making change and delivering value to our clients. So reach out to any one of our team, reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn, and we'll have a conversation. So uh, with that, I am going to adjourn, and hopefully you all have a great day, great rest of the week, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.